Hi, and welcome to the first of 4 episodes of Equipped broadcasts that we'll be doing this year. And I'm excited to be here today. Today, the title of today's broadcast is Equipped to Thrive, and we are excited to share with you our stories. I have two amazing women, Jennie Ashford and Krystl Michalek, and myself, and we're going to share our stories of how we have learned to thrive even in the midst of a difficult situation. And one of the things that I really want to stress is that you don't have to be completely healed in order to thrive. And you can thrive at any point, but it just looks different. And so we're going to share a little bit about our stories, and hopefully it will help you on your healing journey. Now, I have noticed that for some reason this feed did not connect to Facebook. And if you are watching and you're watching from YouTube or from from Twitter or LinkedIn, if you could go to the Facebook page and maybe tell people that they can watch it on those other platforms, that would be great, because I want everyone to be able to watch it, and I'm not exactly sure why it did not connect to Facebook, and I apologize for that. So before we get started, I want to do a couple of housekeeping things. First, you can share your comments and ask your questions by going in the live chat or in the comments, and we will be having Q&A after each session, and so you can ask your questions there. You can and we will try to get to as many of those as we can. Also, there will be 2 giveaways, but in order to enter the giveaway, you have to type #giveaway in the live chat or the comments to enter, and we will be doing those at the end of the second session and then at the end of the broadcast. And here's just a little sneak peek of what we're giving away. So there's some really exciting gifts that we can do, that you can win. Just so be sure to enter #giveaway into the comments or the live chat, depending on where you're watching. I'm going to leave that up there to remind you of that. And so those are just a few of the housekeeping things. And now I just want to share a little bit about my journey and my experience with thriving. And a little bit about myself, for those of you that don't know me. I have a Master of Science degree in social work, a Master of Arts in Cultural Apologetics. I have over 30 years experience as a social worker, and I'm a survivor of childhood trauma. And I've seen both professionally and personally the devastation that child abuse can cause. And I really have devoted most of my life to use my experience to bring hope to those who feel lost and hopeless due to childhood trauma, and to bring encouragement to those who try to help them. And so today I want to talk about my experience as in thriving. And I'm kind of at the end of my life, I guess. I just turned 70 last Sunday, and I feel that I can look back, and I have a perspective that hopefully will help you as you're making that journey. So I want to share my experience from the past and how I thrived in the most difficult times in my life. I want to share what I'm doing now and how I'm thriving. And then I want to share a little bit about my hope for the future. And so, as a social worker for Children's Protective Services, one of the things that we often had to investigate was a report that a child was failing to thrive, and they would have a diagnosis of failure to thrive. So we would investigate that. And what that meant was that the child was not actually was not growing, was not doing the things that they needed to do. They were malnourished, they were lethargic, and there was not an obvious medical reason for that. And so CPS would investigate it to make a determination, if the child, why the child was not thriving. And many times what would happen is it would not be malicious neglect or abuse on the part of the parent, but it would be that the parent was having emotional difficulties, or the parent was having physical problems, or there was financial difficulty, they were in poverty, unemployed, and so in essence what was happening is that the child was not thriving because the parent could not thrive. And so our task then was to help the parent overcome some of their issues. And sometimes that worked and sometimes it didn't. But the main thing that we looked at was the motivation of the parent and how they were perceiving their situation. And so thriving is really as much about your attitude toward your circumstances as it is about the actual situation. And for me, that really changed my perspective as I look back on my experience of healing. When I first began to remember the abuse that happened to me, it was incredibly traumatic, and I couldn't really function. I ended up being admitted to a day program at a local psychiatric hospital, and I was there for a year, where I would go at 9:00 in the morning and I would come home at 3 in the afternoon. And I did that for a year. And during that season, I couldn't work, and the thought of going to work was absolutely terrifying to me. But as I look back, what I was able to do during that season is I was able to be in a very structured environment where I could utilize things and skills and tools that I already had to be creative, to connect with the other patients, and to have the support system that I needed to move forward. And I was constantly wanting to move forward. I was not content to stay in that situation, even though moving forward was terrifying to me. And I eventually was able to go back to work. I still struggled, and it took a while for me to get back to a place where I was really functional. But as I look back, I can see at every stage of that, there were aspects where I was consistently moving forward, and I was able to grow, which is really what thriving means, is that you're growing and that you're moving forward. It doesn't mean you're all better and that everything's wonderful. And so that was what thriving looked like for me in that situation. And so so now in my life, I am retired and I live in a senior community, and I feel very content. And I feel like I can manage the things that happen in my life. I still struggle sometimes, but I have things in place that help me in those difficult times. And I think thriving for me now looks like being able to manage those stressful situations when they come up, and stopping the negative thoughts with tools that I have so that I don't spiral. And I think one of the biggest things that changes for me during this season in the terms of thriving is that I can allow myself to experience fairly intense emotions and not get overwhelmed by them. But I can understand that they are, in fact, they are just emotions, and I don't have to be controlled by them. And so that is one of the biggest changes in my life that has occurred over the last several years. And I have met new people here. I continue to stretch myself because I'm an introvert, by nature, and meeting new people and going to activities is difficult for me sometimes, but I have been able to do that. And so even in this stage of my life, I am moving forward. I went back to school and got a second master's degree just because I wanted to, and I'm constantly looking at ways to grow. And as I look towards the future, I really want to be able to continue to do that. But to do that and to continue to thrive, I know I have to keep the things in my life that have allowed me to thrive to this point. And those things are having a really strong support group, being able to reach out to people and when I need help and not being afraid to do that, going back to structure when I need to have the structure. And so those are the things that I enjoy doing or that I have to do in order to continue to thrive. And those are just a few of the things that keep me grounded. And it's important as you are healing that you realize that at every stage of healing, there are growth points, and that you can thrive if you embrace those growth points. If you will, in your situation, look at, okay, this is really a difficult situation for me, but what is it that I can do to keep moving forward instead of just staying in this place and just focusing on surviving day to day? And that is one of the things that is so important, is to be sure that you're looking at your situation as an opportunity to grow versus a survival mode. Because in survival mode, you get stuck. You are just surviving. You're not moving forward. And thriving means moving forward. So that's just a few things that I have learned over the years, and I hope that they were helpful to you. Now, we don't have a lot of people on here, so I don't know if either of my guests want to ask me a question, or if you want to, I'm not sure exactly what to address other than those things. There is going to be a panel at the end of the session, and we will address any questions at that point too for people that join later. And in between the sessions, I'm going to try to get Facebook connected, so hopefully we'll have that for the people that are trying to watch on Facebook. But I would just at this point like to introduce my first guest to the broadcast. Okay, I think Carla put it up there and I took it down. So anyway, yes, Jennie Ashford. She is a business owner and educator. She is from Fayetteville, Arkansas, and she has always sought creative paths and deep relationships. She's a stylist, an educator, a salon owner, a wife, an adoptive and bio mom of 3 boys. 2 of those boys have special needs. And so she has lots of different roles. And she has to separate and organize all those different areas of her life to keep things going. And, sometimes they overlap and it gets a little uncomfortable for her. But she's learning how to surrender, and she's surrendering to the one who plans for her well-being, not disaster, but plans for a future and a hope. And that's a quote that she actually sent to me, so I just really wanted to share that. So, Jennie, welcome to Equipped to Thrive, and I'm going to let you just take it away. So, I am looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to share it, and I just want to start by saying this moment is a big moment for me in terms of my story, and coming to a place where I feel that I can share. And so thank you for listening, and giving me also the opportunity to share it. Um, my my story has been a process. My segment is titled Breaking the Mold because one of the things that often holds us back is just the lies that we lean into, that we kind of let overtake our mind and our heart. And I have definitely been over the last handful of years on a journey of breaking out of those lies and kind of stepping into what is true and the freedom that you find there. So just to give you kind of the beginning and where it started, this would have started around 2014, 2015. I left the cosmetology instructor position that I was working in at the time and went to work for a large scale salon in my area in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and immediately stepped into leadership and management there. Had great relationships. Just was very fulfilled in my work life. At home, we were also at the height of health, so a lot of just security in our marriage. We had 2 young boys at the time. My biological children, our older one of those 2 is on the autism spectrum, and he had made a lot of breakthroughs. We were really comfortable and confident in our marriage. We had purchased a new home and had more space, and realized that it was time for us to adopt. It was something that we talked about in the very beginning of our marriage, and we felt like, okay, we're ready to do this. God is calling us into this. And so we started that very arduous process because we were comfortable in so many ways, and we knew we weren't necessarily called to comfort. And man, we had no idea how far our calling away from comfort was about to be. So, and then spiritually, also one of the just deepest and most consistent times with the Lord that I had, just spending a lot of time in prayer, journaling. I wound up starting a blog just to share with other people what I was learning from Scripture. We found a home church that we felt very solid and secure in, and it was all just really, really good. But there were some things happening under the surface. Hindsight's 2020. So looking back, I now see it a lot more clearly, but there were some things that I was buying into that I shouldn't have been. I was buying into the security and the stability of our life as an assurance that it was pretty much going to continue to be this way. This was the trend that we were on. And then there was also the issue of my position. I love being in leadership roles and supporting and serving the people around me, but also, when it comes to taking pride in your position and letting that affirm who you are, it becomes a challenge. And then I also had some idolatry issues. I was very close with the owners of our business. I would have considered they were a husband and wife, and I would have considered the wife one of my very best friends. And as I was so closely linked with them in business, personally as a friend, and then also in our church community, there's a lot of overlap there, and certainly began to idolize our relationship and my relationship to her, and as a result, left myself very open and vulnerable to some abusive qualities in our relationship that started to come out later. And so that's really what happened. Was stuff started to fall apart, and that was kind of the middle, the hard. And this started with the unexpected passing of the husband of that couple. And so that was a deep loss. And then we went into I had to kind of defer my grief and help support the business, which by this point was 3 locations and almost 50 employees. And so there was a lot riding on that as a result of some of the tensions that were created there. I began to lose my relationship with my friend and realized quickly that my only role was going to be supporting the business. And so it just became this kind of domino effect. We began to be kind of ostracized in our church community. My husband lost his job. And in the middle of all of this, our adoption is going full steam ahead. We wound up adopting, at the time, a 13-year-old boy. He's now almost 17, who has intellectual disabilities and deep trauma. And we were told that it would get easier as he settles and all of that. And that has proven to be the opposite of how it's gone. It's only gotten harder in that regard, in terms of his need level. But so all of this happened summer of 2019 into spring of 2020. And then we know what happened in spring of 2020. COVID hit, and that added just another layer to that. And so for me, what really happened was I went into this place of like the dark night of the soul. Just, I felt broken, as far as work. The only way I was able to come in and function was sometimes I would lay down, face on the floor and just cry and beg God, like, I can't get up until you pick me up and carry me through this, because I don't know how I'm going to do it. But it was just so much, so fast, and it was so hard that I began to feel just deeply discouraged and alone, and anger and bitterness really, really set in. And it became hard to know how to go forward. And so then on top of it, that abusive relationship started to unfold a little bit more, became a lot more obvious that was what was happening. And, so as much I'm giving you this laundry list of hard things, but I'm so grateful for it, because it feels like, when I look back on that just a nuclear bomb was just dropped on our whole world. And it kept coming. The final one was finding out then that the wife, my employer, was having an affair after her husband passed, was having an affair with our pastor of our church. And the pastor's wife was another close friend of ours. And so just all of these implosions, stacking on top of each other. And but once the dust settles from just all of that, you see so much more clearly. You realize how much more you need to see truth, and how much more that matters than your stability, your security. The truth really is your only stability. It's the only thing that you can really count on is what the Lord's truth is, and not the lies that you're choosing to believe, or the security that you're choosing to buy into. And so, as hard as that was, I'm grateful, because it opened my eyes to a lot of things. And I can tell you one clear moment where I knew that this was bad was I finally came to a point where I had a meeting with the owner of my business, and it had just gotten so ugly. I sat down with her and I said, "Do you want me to work here anymore? Do you want me here?" And I didn't get a response. I got that was followed up with a question. And the question was, well, if you weren't here, where would you go? What would you do? And I said, and this was the moment where I feel like the Lord really opened my eyes to how bad it had gotten for me, and how much I had allowed that influence to continue in my life. Because what came out of my mouth was, well, I don't know. I guess I would have to work in another industry. And her response was, well, that makes sense. And I remember walking away from that meeting and thinking, that's crazy. First of all, it's crazy that I would give up 13 years of my experience because I wasn't working for her anymore. And I had been so committed to that role. And what was happening there was that there was this kind of this dynamic where I owed things, and I should consider leaving. um, because of that I'm worthless apart from that experience. So I started to see things clearly for what they were, and the journey out of that, seeing things clearly doesn't mean that everything immediately turns around. It has been a long, hard process out of it, and in many ways, I'm still in it. I'm still learning all the things that I believed, but the result that came out of it was once I stepped into the truth. Um, I feel like the Lord honored that. He opened up doors for me to open our own salon. I left that salon immediately. I started making plans, and inside 4 months, we built out a 3,400 square foot salon. Um, People just started calling me and saying, "Where are you going? What are you doing? Because I want to be with you." And so our salon was filled. The funding for that salon was literally dropped into my lap. I mean, it just, you know, as I was stepping out in faith into the truth, God was meeting me there, and he was showing himself faithful, and he was showing me that he had never left me. I was never alone. I had never been abandoned. So it's still hard every day, and we've stepped into new things that are hard, but because my because my security is not in the same things. It's not in my position as a business owner. It's not in my position as a wife or a mother. It's not in anything other than what God has called me to do, and that he is sustaining me. So we're in a completely different place than we were before. And I'm even taking on new things. I'm actually in Brooklyn. I'm talking to you from my hotel room right now because I decided to get even more brave. And I never would have done that if I were still working in a position where someone had the authority in my life to tell me that I couldn't do these things. And I am here because I auditioned for a new role with the companies that we work with. And I'm training to start traveling the country and teaching other salons how to cut hair. And it's a very elite team. And I never would have tried it before. So all of that to say, like, it's been a journey. It still is a journey. It's still hard all the time. But there's so much good in it, and it's so much easier to see because my eyes are fixed on the right things now, and I was freed from that. I was that mold that was compressing in on me and holding me back is broken. So that is my story.
Okay, so thank you, Jenny. That is amazing story, and I've had the privilege of watching you on most of that journey, and it's been a thrill to be able to be part of your growth, and as I've seen you continue and to begin to thrive. So we actually do have some questions that have come up, and so the first one is, do you think that, I guess, the abusive relationship, that it began as an abusive relationship or grew into one?
I think it was from the beginning, and that's really hard for me to acknowledge. I will say I think one of the biggest temptations when you're in a leadership position is to, your whole job, if you're leading people, is to build them up and grow them, right? But when they come to a point where they might surpass you, it gets scary, and it can call a lot of things into question for you. And the temptation is to try to keep people to you with a golden handcuff. And so I
Right.
think it was very subtle in the beginning, and
Okay.
then became very obvious
Right.
when later on.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, and I think sometimes we're just so not aware that it is an abusive relationship until sometimes not even until we're actually out of it, and then we're like, oh, that really wasn't a good relationship. So yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
if you remember, I mean, you talked me through all of that. You
Yeah.
were the
Yeah.
one who told me that it
Right.
was abuse.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
was incredulous at first. I couldn't
Right,
believe
and
it.
you exactly, and you had a hard time even accepting that. That was difficult for you during that season. I do remember that. So were there situations in your life that set you up for that exploitive relationship, do you think?
I think it was that that idolatry piece of it. I think the fact that I was so happy to be a part of, and that's what's hard about it, was so much of my intentions and my motivations were pure. And that's the thing, we can have good intentions, right? And
Mm-hmm.
still be looking elsewhere to
Mm-hmm.
get our satisfaction or have our needs met or
Right.
get our affirmation. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was not, at some point, I stopped looking at the Lord for those things and I started looking to her for those things and my
Ah, okay.
position
Yeah. Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And that is when I think I left myself vulnerable to that.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. And that kind of leads into the last question that I have, which is, was there a specific word or verse that God gave you to help you through the transition? Which is a little difficult, I know, because of where you
I
were
know
at the time.
exactly what one it was.
Yeah.
I try to do a year of the word, or a word of the year, excuse me, every year. And I think the Lord started preparing me for all of this in the beginning of 2019. I
Okay.
got the biggest word, like clearest that I've ever gotten, which was boundaries. And the verse
Mm-hmm.
that He gave me was from Psalms chapter 16. Where it says that the Lord's my portion and my cup. And it talks about how the boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places, and just remembering that He has boundaries for me and those are
Mm.
good and healthy. And it really took me leaning into that in the first half of the year to protect me in many other ways through what happened afterwards. It wasn't a perfect protection because I had also allowed other things to creep in, and leave me vulnerable. But uh, it did make all the difference, and I did cling to that for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Boundaries are important. And Carla made a comment here, boundaries, LOL, because I'm always talking. Carla is the producer that's kind of doing things in the background, and I'm always talking to her about boundaries. So it's kind of one of my things. People that know me is I talk a lot about boundaries. Well, Jennie, is there any last things that you would like to say before we move on to the next segment? We'll be back at the end, and if there's any other questions that come up in between now, we'll talk about that then. But is there anything you want to leave the audience with before we move on to the next session?
Yeah, I think I mentioned in the beginning that just me being here and saying this is the first time I've publicly shared my story. I've had a fear of coming across as wanting to defend myself or things like that. And I'm I'm saying this to say I have been in ownership of my space and separated from that situation for over 2 years now. Um, and I still am feeling the effects and the ramifications of
Yes.
feeling silenced and working through some of that. And so I would say again, what Charlotte's made such a clear point on, that it doesn't happen overnight. It's not quick, and healing shouldn't be quick. So I'm grateful for
Right.
the opportunity to share, but it's been a hard journey just to get here. So be encouraged if you feel like there's a lot in front of you, in terms of healing. You you don't have to eat the elephant all in one bite.
That's
It's
good.
one
I like
day,
that.
one bite at a time.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Jennie, and we'll see you at the end of the broadcast for a little panel. But thank you so much for sharing that. That was a lot of really good insight, and I just appreciate you being part of our broadcast today. So, all right. Well, we were going to have a giveaway at this point, but we don't have that many people uh, watching, and we don't have anybody that has actually put the hashtag in. So we're going to wait and do that at the end of the broadcast, and we'll just give away both. So if you are watching, please share, please enter into the comments or the chat hashtag giveaway so we can actually give away our awesome prizes, because Jennie donated some really cool prizes and so did Krystl, and we'd love to give those to somebody that's watching. So our next session is entitled A View from the Middle, and Krystl Michalek I've known her for about 4 years, and she's a regular on the Equipped series. She's part of the planning team for that. Krystl has a passion for missions, teaching, and conveying God's Word. She has a bachelor's of fine arts in graphic design, and she has a bachelor and a master of arts in theology, and she is a doctoral candidate. And she's an associate professor at Life Christian University. And she also serves as CFO advertising director for the business that her and her husband have together, Michalek Plumbing. And so I want to welcome Krystl. Thank you again for being here. People that watch regularly know you, and today you're going to be sharing a really difficult story that I am very glad that you have the courage to share today. And as I said, thriving doesn't just happen when you're done healing. It is actually a process. And your topic or your session is entitled "The View from the Middle," because you're in the middle of a recovery process. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you give them the view from the middle. So take it away.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you again for having me. It's always an honor and privilege to share and been along this Equipped for Recovery journey that we have embarked on. So today I am going to get very real and very honest about our recovery journey. And to start off with, I'm just going to dive in. There's no gentle way to say this or create a fantastic opening. I'm just going to dive into it. I am a spouse of someone that is in recovery for sex addiction. As I learned on this journey, sex addiction is different than many of the other addictions. How it rewires the brain, how it changes the reward system, the prefrontal cortex, it kills emotion, it inhibits, the individual from being able to make real connections with people and more. I won't go on about all of the details about it, but you can check out brainheartworld.org for more information and on sex addiction. And I will give some other resources at the end of this for those that are interested in learning more. Most people think that sex addiction means that the addict is some kind of depraved maniac that all women and children should be kept from. I have learned that that is not what that means at all. Majority of the time begins with, that catalyst, a trauma. Sometimes it's big trauma. Sometimes it's smaller traumas, and the individual is unable to manage, and they latch on to something, and that something can be pornography, and the pornography changes the brain, and then it escalates because it doesn't work anymore for the brain, and then it continues to escalate and escalate and escalate. And in our case, it escalated from porn, self-gratification, online affairs, and then a physical affair, along with cross addictions with food and gaming. Can sex addiction, end up the worst of the worst? Yes, but most of the time it does not. With that being said, I need to go over some boundaries. Charlotte, there's our favorite word, boundaries, for my portion. I have discovered through this journey that people love to tell me how I should do things if they find out what we're dealing with. And all kind of advice and questions. And so for the safety of my spouse and me, these are the following boundaries for my portion of the talk. I will not discuss my spouse or his recovery. Any questions I will not answer out of respect for him, because his recovery is his journey. The things I am sharing today, I do have his permission to share. I will not discuss why I'm still married to my spouse. Each of us has our own journey, and know that I'm surrounded by people and counselors that hold me accountable, that are my sounding board. And most importantly, the decision I made to stay is God-led. I do believe it's such a time that if needed, and God will release me from my marriage if certain boundaries are broken. But why I stay or comments regarding divorce, they're not allowed. And comments regarding my spouse or any derogatory towards him are definitely not allowed. Again, his journey is his journey, as is recovery from his addiction. So I'm going to talk about 4 things today. The catalyst that sent me to recovery, I call them the atomic bombs. The importance of separating myself from his addiction and him from his addiction, boundaries, and being accountable to myself, and lastly, compassion. The things that really propelled me where I am at today, in the middle. I'm no longer in the initial trauma of the stage of destruction, but I am nowhere near towards the end of this journey. So I began my recovery program in 2015. And truthfully, I had hurts and habits and hangups my whole life, just like most of us. And I'm sure I needed a recovery program long before I finally was broken and desperate enough to enter one. The catalyst that sent me to a recovery program was in 2015, when the first major spiral or atomic bomb from my spouse happened. After attending a fair recovery for porn addiction, he spiraled actually into worse behavior, which can happen when the addict is not really ready to deal with their issues. And not long after the discovery of that initial online affair, I began my recovery journey. Our counselor at the time, sat me down. It was like, it doesn't matter what he does. What matters is that you are healing and you get help. And he recommended, of course, Celebrate Recovery to start with, and continued counseling. And not long after I began my recovery journey, I began dealing with my hurt and anger, because there was a lot. But quite honestly, that part of the recovery was more like, look at me, I made it despite you. It wasn't really focusing 100% on myself. I was still very much in a survival protective mode. But for sure, what I didn't understand is I really didn't understand what was happening with me. There was addiction. I really didn't understand. And we kind of triaged our way through the next few years, having spirals and no real healing for us. And I kind of began to live a separate life from him. I just decided I was going to go forward with my life and, not include him in it. And I did all the things, but we kind of lived in the same house and we got along and had our typical marriage things, but there was no real connection or healing for our marriage. But he also was in a place that he wasn't acknowledging where he really was at. So I just kind of separated myself and, kept telling myself, look, I'm making it, I'm doing okay. And I'm in recovery, I'm getting better. And, it wasn't working. Again, so it wasn't until the end of 2018, the beginning of 2019, that I call the Omega atomic bomb. Like, it was like multiple atomic bombs going off at one time. that sent me into intense counseling in 2019, which was the physical affair that my husband had, and led him to actually leaving us. I was devastated, of course. I had thought we were doing somewhat okay, and it seemed like we were making strides, but that wasn't the case at all. There was a tremendous amount of things going on behind the scenes that I really wasn't aware. And if I was, I just kind of pushed it aside. The red alarm bells going off, I was like, no, I'm just being, silly. I'm being, over emotional or oversensitive to it. And really, I wasn't. They were really red flags that I should have been paying attention to. And, within that moment, like, everything changed in our life. He left his job. And, at the discovery of the affair, and, then he eventually, left us. And, quite honestly, devastation didn't cover what happened with me. I really believed that was something that would never happen to us, and he would never really do that. And here I was, like, living out my worst nightmare, and just, trying to keep my kids together and us to, survive every day. I mean, it literally was like surviving. The adage in recovery is you take minute by minute, and it couldn't be more true, because that's where it was at. It was minute by minute. I had my inner circle, I had people checking on me, I had, my counselor, and we were meeting regularly. I was journaling, just trying to, piece myself back together to some extent so I could function. And in that time, while he was away, I had a catastrophic injury where I shattered my shoulder. I mean, I literally exploded the top of my humerus, where it rolls into my the shoulder area, and it was very catastrophic. Ended up having surgery, and they had to put it all back together what they could. It broke in multiple places along with shattering it, and at some point through that, he made the decision to come home and take care of me and stop everything. Of course, there were immediately boundaries put in. Before that could happen, he had to enter into a recovery program. He had to have his own counselor, and, or he wasn't allowed back in the home. And so he did start some of those things, and he did come home to take care of me, because overnight I went from mostly functioning to completely like an infant. I couldn't do anything on my own. I couldn't walk. I couldn't change my clothes. I couldn't brush my hair. I could brush my teeth, and that's kind of where it was at. He literally had to help me do everything. I do believe, that moment that my shoulder broke, it was absolutely meant to break me completely. It was such an unusual accident. And I do believe that God took that moment to start turning things around for us in regards to healing, where I would really, really dive into my own healing, and he would begin his journey of healing from addiction. And at that point, I continued my counseling to piece myself back together. And through that course of the first year, I really, 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 like I said, began to dive into my own healing. But I was still very much attached to him and his recovery, and I couldn't separate myself in a healthy way from his addiction. I took everything on. It's all my fault. I'm responsible for him. If I do this, then I'm going to cause him to spiral. And I just couldn't separate myself, and, there were spirals, and then there were moments where we separated. But no real progress. It was like a few steps forward and a lot of steps back. And then we'd make a step forward. And, it was like this back and forth thing for a long time. And finally, in 2021, he had a major relapse, not an affair, but definitely a major relapse with pornography. And at that point in my own recovery, I had healed enough to finally put boundaries in place, because the light bulb went off with help of my counselor that I was enabling him by not holding and keeping boundaries. I would get sucked into, the I'm sorry's, I won't do it again. And I'd like, okay, well, we really don't have to do this, or don't have to keep that. And at this point, I finally got to the place where I said, enough. I'm not doing this anymore. And I gave him a choice, and it was to, find another, because he had quit counseling, to find an individual counselor, a marriage counselor, and a recovery program for sex addiction. I did begin to realize that we have a much bigger problem, and that is sex addiction. And of course, as soon as we actually entered into counseling, one of the first things both counselors said was he needed to enter a program for sex addiction. He definitely has, problems when they heard our history. And, I would love to sit and tell you that when he entered that program, everything was great. It was not. In fact, it got worse. It was incredibly difficult, to him dive in to begin to deal with all of the things. And that addict brain was very, very unhappy. And, it was just incredibly difficult. And I'm grateful for the people that were surrounding me. I'm grateful that God sustained and upheld me through that process. But at that moment, also when it became the worst, a few months into the recovery program, when I began to address myself as like all the traumas that happened because of his addiction. And I entered into a program for spouses of sex addiction. And I remember the moment we were asked to write a letter to sex addiction. And that moment is what began to free me from his addiction, that I could literally separate myself. And then we put into place, my counselor and I, my husband in his recovery would call it pillars, and I call it a mantra or daily pillars, where I began to recite things every day. And literally we have a checkup every morning where I recite these things. I recite, I am not responsible for his recovery. I'm not at fault or at blame for his addiction. I am not a failure. My anger is not the same as his addiction. And there's one more. I'll think of it here in a minute. And then I follow it up with, I am human. I am wise. I am creative. I am brilliant. I am called and purposed by God for his kingdom. And you'll forgive me, I'm going to say a cuss word real quick. I'm a badass warrior woman of God. I am, brilliant and creative, and I'm just freaking awesome. And then I would follow it up with what God says about me. And, there's a whole series of scriptures. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I am have not been given a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Therefore, submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee. And there's about 5 or 6 other verses altogether. But that is how I start my day. And that began to build myself up. I was very, very beaten down from the journey. And I took on so much of his recovery and his addiction as my fault. And that reminder that I'm not responsible for his recovery. I'm not at fault at blame for his addiction, really began to change things. And that's that separating from his addiction, myself from his addiction. And, as I have grown and healed, I was able to set even more boundaries as we have gone along, and they've changed, and not realizing truly how huge this was for both of us. It held me accountable to myself, which was huge, because over the journey, I was no longer accountable to myself. I would make promises and break them. And the more I broke the promises to myself, the more broken I became, on top of all the other things. And that was one of the biggest changes, that I began to be accountable to myself. I began to go, this is the boundary, and I'm holding myself accountable to it. And I would share it with my inner circle, with my group, from my spouse's group and my counselor. And I'm like, okay, these are the boundaries. I need you to help me hold accountable. So when something happens, I can stand by it, because I have that emotional support to do so. And it's been difficult. I have found myself falling back into the enabling behavior at times. And, I get that reminder, gentle, of course. And then some others are like, girl, that's a boundary you broke yourself. You need to get it back in there. And, just helping to uphold those boundaries. And that continues to help separate me from his addiction, because I am not his addiction. He had choices to make along this journey, just like I had, that had nothing to do with me. The issues that began his addiction began long before I came into the picture. And even now, if things go into conflict or something happens, I'm still not responsible if he chooses to relapse or any behavior, his addiction behavior, he chooses that. And it's not my responsibility. And that has been huge for that. And along with the boundaries and separating myself from his addiction, I learned to separate him from his addiction, because he isn't his addiction either. There were traumas and things that happened in his life that was a catapult and a catalyst for him. But underneath that, he isn't a bad person. He is a person that has a lot of unhealed trauma, and he's working on it, and he is not his addiction. I'm not perfect at that. When things happen and there's issues that arise or triggers, I don't always separate him from his addiction. I'm not able to. But these days I am much better at it, and it helps because it reframes how I see him. I see him as God sees him, and God sees him as an heir to the throne, beloved, his child, just like he sees me. And that next piece that began as I have healed and we have walked this journey is compassion. And that was key to the forgiveness part. And yes, there are still a lot of unforgiven things that I need to work on, which is why we talk about me being in the middle. There's still unhealed trauma that needs to be dealt with in forgiveness. And but I began to have compassion. And then that compassion sparked a desire to learn about addiction and sex addiction and what it does to the brain. And it began to give me an understanding of what he's dealing with. Will I fully ever understand? No, I do not have addictions or those kind of things. I don't have them. But I can learn about them to understand, to help him and support him. Although his recovery is his journey, I'm still in the circle as his wife. And I can support him and pray for him and go from there. But for sure, this journey is definitely not a sprint. It is more like an ultra marathon, sprinkled with all kinds of ups and downs. And I had no idea when I began this journey. Do I wish it wasn't our journey? Of course. But I don't regret it either. The healing that it has brought myself, and for all the things and the healing that is happening in our marriage, I definitely do not regret.
Thank you, Krystl. That was an amazing presentation, and your story is inspiring, and it's painful to listen to some of it, but I just, again, thank you so much for having the courage to share it here today. So I have a couple of questions to ask you, but before we do that, I want to remind people that are watching to please enter hashtag giveaway in the comments or the chat so that we can give away the prizes. And again, if we can show a little sneak peek of what those are going to be, and so you can get an idea of what we're doing. They are some pretty amazing things, some items from Jennie's salon that she has donated, and then a actual creative original art project from Krystl Studio. They're two Christmas early because they're two Christmas ornaments, and then also copies of both of my books. So please be sure and enter hashtag giveaway so that we can do those after we have the panel. And I think what I'm going to do, because of where we are time-wise, I think I'm going to bring Jennie back in, and we're going to go ahead and do the panel. And I will just ask Krystl a couple of questions that came up, and then I think I'm going to give opportunity if you guys want to ask each other questions, because I think that would be interesting as well. And so, and then if anyone else, we do have a couple of questions from the audience, and we'll spend a few minutes doing that, and then we'll wrap things up and do the giveaways. Hopefully we'll have some people that actually enter the giveaway so we can actually give away these awesome prizes. Okay, so Krystl, a question that came from Carla. Where were there other times in your life where you took on the responsibility for other people's actions?
I'm sure. I'm sure. My husband isn't, the first scenario where I've done that. Growing up, I definitely felt responsible for other people's actions, and there was a lot of blame put on me for things that happened that were not my own, but I began that early on.
Okay. Yeah, so it was kind of a life pattern, so it didn't just happen because of this situation. And I think that's an important thing to consider, that usually the patterns that we have as adults get started when we're kids, and the way that the environment that we grow up in, and we learn different coping mechanisms, and they continue into adulthood. Okay, Jennie, I have a question for you, which is not in the comments, but it's just a question that I have. What would you say to the person in the audience who feels trapped by the expectations of others?
I would say you need to examine what it is that's making you feel trapped, which is the hardest part, truly, is being able to step back and be aware enough to realize that you're trapped, and that you're feeling trapped, but there is a way out. And so being able to, it's kind of like if you're having anxiety or something like that, it's not as clear in the moment, and you have to find a way to ground yourself, and grounding yourself is going to come directly from your relationship with the Lord. Your ability to ground yourself and see things from a different perspective would be totally contingent on whether or not you're looking to Him for those answers and for that information and for the way out.
All right. And so, Krystl, what has helped you stay the course of your recovery?
Consistency.
Okay.
Hands down. I'm very consistent with the things that have been put in place for myself, my counseling, my journaling, my Bible study, all of those things. And it's, keeping my accountability people, but it's consistency that has helped me stay the course of this journey.
Okay. Okay. Do either of y'all have a question for me, since I didn't come up with questions for myself? Do you guys have a question that you'd like to ask me, either of you?
So Charlotte, at what point in your journey did you begin to feel like you were starting to thrive?
Wow, that's a big one. I don't think I realized I was thriving until like I said in my presentation, I can look back now and really identify that I was thriving in different ways, but I don't think I really realized that I was thriving until I was probably about 6 or 7 years into my recovery and into my healing, because everything seemed so overwhelming. And it really took, I had some pastors that came into my life at that point, and they helped me see that I was lovable and that God did love me, and to help me really believe that and understand what unconditional love was. And I also think the other thing, which I don't really share that often, but my husband, my second husband, who I met in 1999, he was really the first person, or the first relationship that I had, who saw me for who I was, and not for what I'd gone through, and not for the experiences that had happened to me. And I think his care for me and his love for me allowed me to really realize that I was actually thriving, considering everything I'd been through. And so I think it took me a while to really accept and acknowledge that I had been able to thrive along the way. But yeah, so let me think. Do you guys have a question for each other? Anything you'd like to ask each other? I have one more to ask Krystl, but Krystl, do you have anything you'd like to ask Jennie?
I'm thinking. I had a mention she was talking, and I should have written them down.
Okay. What about you, Jennie? Is there something you want to ask me or Krystl?
Well, I think it's so interesting. I think, in listening to each one of us, and there seems to be that strong theme of boundaries being a necessity for each one of us. And so I think probably not a question around it, but maybe an insight that I really had when I was listening to Krystl, especially in the beginning, just lay out those ground rules before she went any further. And I was sitting here like, yes, like just so
exactly.
amped. And I just thought, I think that's how you know if you're in a healthy place with boundaries, is if you can hear somebody else set boundaries for you and embrace them, and
that's
be
excellent. Yeah,
energized by them. Because boundaries are hard, and
yes, they
people don't like boundaries when they're being set for them. And so I'm just thinking like, okay, that is a new way that I'm going to check myself. If I'm finding that somebody's setting a boundary for me and I'm not cheering them on in that, I need to probably do a quick little heart check. So
that's actually really good insight. That's excellent, actually. So yeah, so here's a kind of open question from the audience. What advice would you give to someone who thinks that they're too big of a mess to even start? So I'll address that, but do you guys have an answer for that? Either of you? How would you respond to someone who thinks they're too big of a mess to even start? Can you relate?
Go in. Yes.
1000%. Yes.
Yeah.
So, can I share an experience of my first time in Celebrate Recovery? Like,
Sure.
literally, the counselor, like, it was awful. There was a huge episode. I have an emergency meeting with him, and he's like, "You are going tonight. Do you understand me? You're going to Celebrate Recovery, and this is where. And you can go here or here, but you're going." And I'm like, "You need to take care of you." And I was just like, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir." And so he came, but really, when I got there, I didn't want to go because I wasn't one of them, right? I don't need recovery. He does, not me. And so that's how, like, I didn't even want to go in the building. Like, it was awful. But there was this thing in the back of my head that was like, go. And I knew it was God's little voice telling me to go. And I went. And
Good. All right.
and I just kept on going, even though I was sure he needed it, not me.
Right.
Until that
Right.
light bulb of like, oh wow, girl, you really, really need help, you know. But you just have to go anyways.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
sometimes you have to go in spite of yourself, right? You have to
yes.
be willing to
Yes.
say, okay, I don't really think I need this, but or nobody's really going to help, or I'm a lost cause, which is where I was. I was like, okay, nothing's going to help. I have to be evil. There's really nobody that's going to be able to help me stop this, because my struggle was with sexual addiction and for many years, and it's very embarrassing. It's hard to deal with, but a lot of times, we do go to something for someone else, and it's only when we really decide to do it for ourselves that the healing begins. We cannot do that for other people. Do you have anything to add, Jenny, to that question?
Yeah, I would say we don't do our healing journey alone. And so I would say if you need a first step and you're feeling like too big of a mess, you need to link arms with someone who can walk you through it. Charlotte has been been one of those people for me, but you need other people looking at you with a different filter than how you see yourself.
That's good. That's really good, because that's true. Because people see you differently than you view yourself, and you not only have to have someone that's going to tell you that, but you also have to be willing to hear it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or at least have the trust in that person to give it a try, right? Because sometimes you don't believe that you need it, or you don't believe that anybody can help you, but if you have, and I think that's why relationships are so important. You really have to be able to do that. So, okay, so one last question to everybody. How do you know if someone is abusive, if they don't respect boundaries? How do you know that? How can you tell? You two that are now experts in boundaries. Or getting there anyway. So, what would you tell somebody to identify an abusive relationship, or people that are not, someone that's not respecting a boundary? How do you identify that?
I think a very simple definition of abuse is someone giving you something that you don't need or withholding something from you that you do need.
Oh, that's good. That's excellent.
And
Okay.
so, and I think the distinction there, the key word is need. A lot of times we mistake our wants for needs, but the things that are truly essential to you, things like honoring your dignity or your humanity. If someone's not giving you that, that's an abusive relationship. So if you can identify your need and you can identify that they have it to give to you and they are withholding it, or if they are offering you something else that's harmful to you and it's not what you need, that's a pretty easy indicator for the nature of that relationship.
Okay. Krystl, that's excellent, Jenny. Krystl, you want to add anything to that?
So quite honestly, it took me a minute to figure out there was abusive things happening. I don't know how in depth to go, with addiction, and the addict typically gaslights, manipulates. There's, some narcissistic behavior, and it's very slow. When we started out married, I was very independent, strong, and then all of a sudden, it just kind of creeped up that I began to lose myself completely and to take fully on the addiction, because that's what addiction, addicts do. If they get caught or there's a spiral, all of a sudden they're spinning that entire scenario and it's your fault. And they're extremely convincing. And so all of a sudden you're like, well, it is my fault. Oh, it is. I did do that. And all of a sudden you're almost apologizing when it's them. But so that one, in this scenario, in our scenario, is a little muddy. It wasn't overnight that all of a sudden, it was years of this. Exactly. And then once I started like diving into my own recovery and dealing with things, then the light bulb started going off of like, I don't think so. That's not right. But it wasn't something that was definitely glaring. It was very subtle. Just like his addiction, I didn't know it for years. What was actually happening? It took quite a few years into our marriage before it really manifested, and then began our thing. But I don't know if that fully answers the question, but that is my experience with that in particular.
Exactly. And I think that the key is that you can't really know or understand that someone is violating boundaries if you don't have any boundaries, or if your boundaries are really porous, where you kind of just willy-nilly everything. And so I think the first thing is, and I think that your points, both of you, were excellent, is that you have to, I think a lot of times you have to have an outside person help you with that. You cannot often identify it, because it's a way of life, and you have lived that way for so many years that it's normal. And so you mean to have someone tell you that you can set a boundary, you're like, what? No. I mean, that's kind of how I was. It's like, what? No. Because for me it was more I wouldn't set boundaries out of fear of either being abused or fear of losing a relationship. And so I was very much a people pleaser for many, many years, because I would, not have boundaries at all. And I was kind of a chameleon, and I would, if someone that I was involved with liked motorcycles, then I all of a sudden loved motorcycles. It was like I did lose myself. And so I think as we heal, people remind us that we are important in and of ourselves, and it's really healthy to set those boundaries. So I think that is a very important thing. So okay, so I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to once again share a parting thought, and then we're going to transition to closing and doing the giveaways. So Krystl, Jennie, what would you like to leave the audience with? Krystl, looks like you're up first because you're on the focus.
Okay. Really, I would just encourage someone to stay the course.
Okay.
It is, and again, it's an ultra marathon with pitfalls and more spirals, but stay the course. Even on your, Charlotte can attest, I've had some really bad days, even now in the, but stay the course. God's words, teaches us, dive in and hold tight to his word, because of the hope, that mustard seed of faith that builds hope. It doesn't die. And yes, there's times I wanted it to be quite honest. I was just like, I'm done, I can't. And you know what? Tomorrow's a new day, and
Exactly.
I can make it through tomorrow. And you know, there are lots of moments in this journey that is how I managed that day. Is I'm going to make it till noon. I'm going to make it tonight.
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden, I've made it. So stay the course.
Okay.
You can do it, but with lots of help from other
Okay.
people.
All right. Jennie, what parting thoughts do you have for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo what Krystl said. And I would say, I had it and then it walked right out of my brain, which, you know, that's one of my favorite things to do is forget exactly what I'm about to say. My biggest thing is remembering that we're not, like, if we're talking about being equipped to thrive, we are not, any one of us, like speaking today or just any human on the planet, equipped out of just ourselves on our own. We have people who come alongside us and carry us or hold us up when we can't go a day. We have the Lord to lean on, especially. I think if we're trying to do all of the equipping to get ourselves through it on our own, that's where it's going to fall apart again. And so I would just remember that it's not going to come only from within. That's part of it, but that's not all of it.
Exactly. Yes. And I'm just so thrilled that the two of you have been willing to be so transparent and so honest. And I think the things that I would like to say to those that are watching either live or that you watch the replay is that you're not alone in this. And a lot of times when you're healing from a trauma or from any kind of a difficult situation, sometimes isolation is what we think is what we need. We think that we need to do it by ourselves because somehow that makes us strong. But in reality, thriving comes when we do it in community, whatever that community is. And, you know, for me, God is at the top of that list of community because I consider him a friend. I have a small circle of friends that I contact on a regular basis and ask for prayer. And then I have 2 or 3 friends that I contact on a daily basis and interact with that know me for years and have seen me in my journey. And although I'm not actually in counseling anymore, it's been a number of years since I was, but that was an essential part of my healing process. And I would say to the audience that the essentials of thriving during your healing process is to have therapeutic intervention of some sort, have a strong connection with God and with a group of believers that you trust and that you can connect with, and to have a connection, like I said, with God, and then also to step outside of yourself and to take risks to connect with community at large, doing things, and that can be scary, and you have to be careful with that, but to see that the world is more than just your healing, I think, because I think when we're healing, sometimes we get tunnel vision and all we think about is the pain that we're in and wondering if we're ever going to be any better. And one of the things that was the most helpful to me was when I was in that day program years ago, is that we spent a good portion of the day doing arts and crafts. The whole day was not spent in therapeutic intervention. And that was so healing for me because I'm a artsy crafty person, but if someone that isn't, probably that wouldn't have been that therapeutic, but it was for me because it allowed me for those moments to step outside of the healing and actually just do something creative and engage that part of my brain. And I think that's such an important part of being able to thrive through your healing, is to not be so focused on the healing process that you stop enjoying life, that you stop doing the things that you enjoy. And even if you can only tolerate doing it for 5 or 10 minutes a day, do it. I mean, some of the people that I counsel with, I set aside kind of requirements for them to spend 30 minutes a day being creative or doing something fun. And yes, and we have smiles all around here. So, but yes, because it's so important to have that break from healing and the pain and the emotional, because it's exhausting. So that would be my counsel, or my last words. So thanks, you guys. This has been fun. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. And we had a pretty steady audience, not a lot of interaction, but I think part of that was because a lot of people were going to watch it on Facebook, and we did connect to Facebook eventually, but we might have lost some people. But I'm hoping that people will watch the replay, and when they do, I am just thrilled that they're going to be able to hear you guys share your stories. And again, I just want to tell you that you both are important to me in my life, and you have really fed into me as well. If as much, if not in some ways more, than perhaps I have fed into your life. So thanks again for being here. And we're going to do the giveaway. We have 2 entries, so we're going to do both giveaways. So here we go with giveaway number 1. We'll just see of the 2 people who won that. So Carla, take it away with the giveaway. Okay, Dina Elder, congratulations. You're the winner of the first giveaway. And here's a slide of what you've won. And, well, maybe not. Anyway, so, okay, yeah, here's what you've won. So, Jennie, you want to talk a little bit about the 2 things that you donated there, so Dina kind of knows what they are, since those came from you?
Sure. Yeah. So that the book, How Far You Have Come, is by an author and artist. Her name is Morgan Harper Nichols. And it's a journey. It's kind of a journey through, across the United States, like a road trip, but basically it's a journey through life and beautiful things and hard points. So it's a book of poetry that's kind of framed in that journey. It's really talking about, the highs and lows of your life. So it's a really fun and beautiful, interesting read that you can kind of pick up and put down, and inspirational. And then the Let It Go Circle is a deep conditioning treatment from the brand that I work with, Davines. They're an amazing company. And that specific deep conditioner is just about like de-stressing. That's why it's called Let It Go. So it's actually got scents in it that are designed to make you just calm and relax. So I hope you enjoy it.
Thanks. And then the book on the right is my most recent publication. It's a devotional entitled Light in the Darkness, and there's 25 daily devotionals for trauma survivors, but they're really just about for anybody. And it has a space for reflection and for prayer on each of the days. So I hope that you enjoy that as well. Okay, and Dina, if you can send me your mailing address, I can pass that on to Jennie, and I will get you the book. And just you can do that by going to charlottethomason.com/contact. Okay, so we can do the other giveaway, which, since there's only 2 people, it might actually be either the same person or Carla, because she's the other entry. But let's do the second giveaway. And So is this the second? Oh, here we go. All right. Okay, so we're gonna let Dina get both of them, Carla, or do you want to do it again and you win it? Or we can just let her have the whole shebang. So. I think we're just gonna let her have the whole shebang. So let's show what that is, and both of y'all can talk about the prize. So, all right. So, Jennie, you want to explain what that product is there on the left?
Sure. So that's another Davines product. It's their most popular product. It's certainly our top seller in the salon. It's great for all hair types, and it's kind of a miracle in a bottle. If you look up what it does, it reduces your dry time. It reduces frizz. It adds conditioning agents. It protects from heat. It just kind of everything that you would need it to do, it does. It's pretty great.
That's awesome. Okay. And Krystl, talk about your little gift that you made.
Sure. So they are handmade ornaments. I have a thing for Christmas. Anybody that knows me well knows that Christmas is hands down one of my favorite seasons, and the next one is Easter. So I just actually reopened my studio, and these are truly one of my favorite ornaments. So you're getting a little Christmas early. And, of course, why I love Christmas is because, that's the day the whole world changed when Jesus was born, and, changed our lives forever from that moment of heaven coming to earth. And, so literally I make things for Christmas all year. Because of that love. And so I'm just sharing my love of Christmas with you.
That's awesome. And so in addition to the devotional, you'll also get a signed copy of my memoir, What Kind of Love Is This? Where I share my story of healing from childhood abuse and the hope that I found throughout that process, and how I discovered what it meant to be loved unconditionally by God. So those things will be on the way to you in the next little bit. They'll be in multiple packages because Krystl will send hers, and Jennie will send hers, and I'll send mine. So you're going to get lots of presents over the next little bit. So thanks for watching, Dina. I'm really glad that you participated, and you actually got the whole kit and caboodle. So that's really awesome. So thanks, you guys, for watching, either as live or when you watch it on the replay. And as I said, I hope that what we've shared will be helpful to you in some way in your own healing journey. And before we go, I want to share with you a special offer that's available to you until Monday, which will be for a limited time. If you purchase either my devotional or a copy of my memoir for $16.99, you will get a free copy of the devotional. So you can do that by going to charlottethomason.com/special offer. And that is a limited time offer. So please, if you haven't already purchased one or both of those books, this is a good opportunity to get it at a little bit of a discount and to get a free copy of the devotional. The devotional, even though Easter is less than 25 days away, the devotional would be a good preparation tool for daily devotions for the upcoming Easter holiday, or just any time of the year, actually. So again, I want to thank everybody for watching, and I want to thank you, Jennie and Krystl, for being part of this broadcast, and I hope that you will join me again in the future. So with that, I'd just like to tell the audience thanks for watching, and hope to see you at the next Equipped series episode, which will be in June. And the topic of that one will be Equipped for the Summer, because summer can be tough. when we're trying to, because schedules change, and so that's the topic for the next Equipped. And I'd like to give you parting by giving you some ways that you can connect with me. So you can connect with me on all of my social media avenues, and you can find out how to get to those by going to my website, charlottethomason.com. And until the next time, thanks you guys for joining me, and have a great rest of your Saturday. Thank you so much. And